Okay. Yeah, so one of the main reasons I wanted to bring you on the show this week, for those of you that don't know, this is David Ruess. He's the founder of a nonprofit called Grace Lead, but he's also one of my roommates and one of my very best friends in the entire world. So a lot of the ideas and concepts that you hear me talk about on the show are just directly derived from conversations that David and I have on just a daily basis. David is not currently in recovery. He's not a recovering addict, so that's not necessarily his story. But I also think it's just extremely important to bring people on the show and get perspectives of people that don't necessarily have the same struggles as we do as addicts. So you don't necessarily have that blind side.
Yeah.
But David, I don't know if I already said this, but David is the founder of a nonprofit called Grace Lead, where he really works hard at encouraging church leaders locally, but also globally, and just creates a lot of good different resources for that. But for starters, if you want to just talk a little bit about Grace Lead and what you do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for coming to my studio here.
Yeah.
You guys can't tell, but my room is around this, and it is a complete...
It's a lot like addiction. This, what you're seeing here is very organized and beautiful, but around us is chaos.
That's actually a great description. That is so true. Yeah, if you saw the state of this room and what it actually looks like, it's like, oh, this is what is going on in here. But this looks nice, hopefully. So Grace Lead, I started about a couple years ago, just because I think I saw how tough it is for ministry leaders, or how tough it can be and how lonely it can feel when you're kind of always feeling like you're in the spotlight. Someone's always looking at you. And there's this quote I heard from one of my professors once saying, just if the goal in ministry with any type of leadership is that who you are in front of people is the same person who you are behind the scenes. Because otherwise you're playing a role, and eventually every actor has to take a break.
Sure.
The intermission is coming. Mm-hmm. And I think that can apply to just the whole idea with sobriety and addiction. That rock bottom will come, and you see that with leadership crashes all the time.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think and it might not be a big crash that you see that gets publicized. It might be you sinking into depression and you withdrawing from the people that you love most in your life, your friends, your family, or growing anger or angry and resentful. And so just realizing how much leaders just need friends.
Yeah.
And need people and confident people, confidants to talk to, and knowing that no one's going to just someone that has their back, basically. Yeah. And so I try to come alongside ministry leaders. I do, and just encourage them and listen and provide counsel or coaching. And then also trying to create resources that would just help better equip them and their teams to talk through some of these issues. And
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I know even you and I talked about that a little bit last night, just about the way you kind of came alongside of me after my mom passed away about a year ago, or a little over a year ago, and just kind of the way you've supported me through that. So yeah.
And real quick about that, just because and this is probably just where I am in my journey, of wanting to pull back the curtain behind things. Oftentimes when we talk, I think people can have these ideas because of the marketing culture that surrounds us, and they're like, oh, I came alongside Josh after his mom died. I wonder if they went through a study or something. It's no, we sat on a couch and we watched Colorado Avalanche games, and we just hung out, and not much needed to be said, or I don't know, it's not as glamorous as you might think. It's just living life with someone, and people don't realize that how significant just living life with someone can be. It's more significant than the glamour and the glitz that our culture purports as what it looks like to minister to someone or be someone's friend. It's no. The mundane is highly significant.
Yeah. I like that too, because I talked about that a little bit in last week's episode of just finding good community and what that looks like, and just sort of the criteria of finding good community and just people that have similar value systems as you, and people that are pointing you towards Jesus. And I really think you did that a lot for me in that time.
That's cool.
And then really quick before we really start diving into the content, if somebody wants to find out more about Grace Lead or wants to support you, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can go to gracelead.org and grace and then lead.org, or just shoot me an email at david@gracelead.org. And I'd love to just hear your story and see where you are, and if possible, I'd love to come alongside you and just
cool.
I'd be happy to do that.
That's awesome. Okay, yeah. So sort of diving in. So the last couple of weeks we're in a 12 episode season where we're gonna go over each of the 12 steps. I chuckle and clarify that because last week I accidentally said I'm going to do 12 episodes on each of the first step.
Yes.
And I'm sure some of the listeners were like, whoa, that's a lot on the first step.
It's a deep dive we're doing.
Yeah, so, but today we're talking about step number 3. And step number 3 is that we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Sort of a reoccurring theme that I've talked a lot about over the last several episodes is how important it is to do the steps in order, that I think that they are in order for a very specific reason. So step number 3, for example, making a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. In order to turn our will over to the care of a God, we have to believe that there is one.
Sure.
And in order for us to believe that there even is a point, or for us to even care that there is a God, we have to believe that our lives have become unmanageable and that we're powerless over our dependencies. At least from a perspective of an addict, like those first 2 steps are crucial for us to arrive at step number 3. Mm-hmm. But so step number 1 feels very chaotic. You're coming to a point where you can feel helpless, like your life is out of control. Step number 2, hope, enters the scene. We start to believe that there is a God and that he can return our lives back into sanity. But number 3 is sort of the first step where we start to take action, where we get to, the step starts as we made a decision. So we get to actually make a decision to start acting. And so the first sort of thing I want to talk a little bit about is like, what does that actually look like to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God? And then a little bit later, I'd like to talk about kind of what that means of like God as we understand him. But yeah, so I guess first and foremost, I'd kind of like to just hear sort of what your thoughts are of like, to you, somebody who doesn't necessarily like struggle with addiction, but obviously like you deal with stuff.
Yeah, I have my own crap, my own sin, my own stuff.
Like, what does that look like to you to sort of like turn your will and also maybe to iterate, if you have any thoughts on like why it says will and lives and like why that looks different. And I know that's kind of like a deep question, so I don't.
Yeah. So when you were asking that, when you were talking about that just a little bit ago, I like the image that comes to my mind of this step is like if you're a hiker and you're lost. Like step 1 is when you finally admit to yourself, F it, like, or like I'm effed, I'm screwed, like I don't know where I am and I'm lost. Like step 2 is when you cry out and then like you're like if there is a God, like please help me, like, and you start like looking to someone else. And then step 3 is your decision to like, you make a decision to start heading a direction. And it's like, and it might not seem like, oh, you made a decision, like I make a decision every day about what to eat, like it doesn't seem like that important. But when you think about the idea of like of direction and like how this decision is determining a direction of your life, like 5 years from now, if you're angled off just a little bit in one way, you're gonna end up miles in like a completely different place than if you like went back to where you were, you know?
Yeah.
Like that angle of approach, that direction that you're headed, that orientation, like it might not seem big in the beginning, and it isn't, because maybe you're only moving a couple steps, maybe you're only doing a couple things, but that's not the point. The point is that you've started moving in the right direction. So I have that image, and it's like how important, just how significant that can be.
Yeah. How do you gauge that? Like what compass do you use to determine that direction?
Dude, that's a great question. I think we're going to get into this a little bit too, but I think it depends for each different. Like I think it, like obviously there's the big rocks. Like I'm not gonna keep on drinking if or I'm not gonna keep on doing this or whatever. I don't know. I'm not gonna go to this bar. Like there's certain things where it's like I know if I drive my car down this way, I'm gonna be tempted to do this.
Yeah, totally.
I think things like that. I think the harder things that we've talked about sometimes is like whatever your struggle is within your how do you say, like journey of sobriety or like sobriety?
Yeah, just in your recovery.
In your recovery, that's like in your recovery, like we've talked about the deceit and the lying that like the hiding of kind of like the second life and like and so I think it depends. Like in your circumstance, one of the decisions was like I'm going to like tell my wife anytime I think of an idea of how I could maybe deceive her.
Totally. Yeah.
But I think I don't know, like with my own journeys with different struggles, like sometimes if it's something as simple as like if my phone becomes a really big temptation, whether social media or like pornography or something like that, it's like, hey, I'm going to leave my phone out here and I'm not going to take it to my bed, or I'm not going to I can't figure out why I'm falling asleep. I'm staring at this like high-tech computer 5 inches from my face scrolling, and it's like, oh, okay, well, but how do you make that decision? And I think trusted voices, I think you talked about that. I don't know if it was the last episode or one of your short
Yeah,
show.
I might have talked about that in the Sobriety short show.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Like turning to outside voices, people maybe, well, I'd say people who've gone before you.
Yeah, that's good.
I know. What do you think? Like, how do you gauge the direction?
Yeah, well, I think a few things. I think some really common terms that we hear in the rooms of recovery is one day at a time.
Okay.
One of my favorite things to talk about in recovery is if one day at a time feels like it's too much, focus on the next 3 hours. If that feels like it's too much of a burden to bear, to stay clean, focus on the next hour, the next 30 minutes, the next 10 minutes, the next 1 minute, the next 10 seconds. If you just don't even say to yourself, if I can stay sober the next 10 minutes, I can stay sober the next 20 minutes. Just say, I'm going to stay sober the next 10 minutes. At the end of 10 minutes, if I want to drink, I can drink. But at the end of 10 minutes, I'll reevaluate.
I love that.
And
you've told me that's the reason I love that so much is it honors the dignity of you as an individual. The way you don't, we all know this, like, because everyone in some ways has like a defiance in them. Like the more that someone tells you not to do something and tries to like smack your hand away, kind of like this like resistance builds up, and it's just like you don't try to control me. Like I'm gonna do what I want. And like the beauty of what you just said is that you're able to say like, okay, I have a desire to drink. I'm gonna make a decision not to drink for the next 10 minutes, and then I'll reevaluate, at that time if I want to take a drink. And like what you're saying is like, hey, I hear that desire. Like I hear that you want to do that, and I'm not gonna like smack your hand away. Like I'm gonna say like, nope, you're significant. You're a human being. Like this desire is real, and like you're important, and so I'll listen to it. And then, but right now I just love that. I think it honors the human spirit of like, it doesn't try to squash it. It says, okay, well, let's pause for now and reevaluate it.
Right. And you're slowly starting to like give yourself dignity back.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is for me is just been like equipping myself with accountability, but also like scripture. And so, and I actually like, there's a couple verses that I think really, speak really well to step 3. One of the popular ones, at least in like Christian-based recovery circles, is Romans 12:1. So, therefore, I urge you, brothers, in the view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Or some translations may not say offer your body, but present your body to God as a living sacrifice, and acknowledging like this life that I've been given is a gift. It's not about me. One of the best ways that I can honor God through my life and through my recovery is to offer it up to God, and that He would use me in whatever way He chooses to use me. I think like that's a good way to orient ourselves towards God and like turn our will and our lives over to Him is like make that decision. Say, I'm going to make the decision to, and what that might look like down the road, you can deal with. But first, just like, and the steps continue to go on to like help guide us through that, but making that decision to turn our wills and lives over. Like another verse is I use this one all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh no, wait. Okay, go. I just have an idea about that.
Sure. Yeah, I was just say it's like for a mindset on the flesh is death, but a mindset on the spirit is life and peace. So asking ourselves the question, how often am I concerned about what I want and what I feel, or what like the spirit wants in my life? But
that's good. Yeah, no, especially I'm glad you said the second one. Like what, and this is just, you see this in throughout the scriptures. Like God is looking to you at this point of decision. He's saying, you can choose life or you can have death.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you choose? And like the idea of like presenting your body as a living sacrifice. It's a weird phrase, living sacrifices, because like you think about in ancient Near East, like people would sacrifice animals, they'd kill them, right, and to appease the god's wrath and things like that, or and the idea of it is like, well, living it will just walk off the altar. But I don't know, like I'm a Star Trek nerd, and there's this episode, I think in Deep Space Nine or something, where this guy gets this is crazy.
That's okay. That's okay.
This is totally nerding out here. There's a moment where this guy, in like a minute, this culture has a technology to make you think, like they inflict their prison sentences in memory. And so in his, like, basically it was like under for a minute, but in that minute, in his mind, he basically spent like 90 years in prison.
Wow. Yeah.
And so he comes out completely wrecked by it. And like his wife and his son, it's like they finally they rescue him, but it's like the minute was already passed and the 99 years had like already transpired. And so you see this guy, O'Brien, he spends the rest of the episode just like depressed and just feels like crap.
Yeah.
And his wife is like, I don't get this, and like, child, why won't you play? And it's like they couldn't recognize the pain and everything that he went through. And there's this pivotal scene where he's just like, I don't want to cause you any more pain. And he's like, has a gun or a phaser to his head. Mm-hmm. And they're like, that's an easy way out. Like, to be a sacrifice is an easy way out, to choose death, thinking that you're helping people. Like, the harder decision is to say, yeah, it's easy to die for someone, but can you live for someone? Yeah. Can you choose to, like, serve other people? Can you choose to, like, not let it get the best of you? Like, can you choose life?
Right.
And that's so hard.
Yeah.
I struggle with that all the time. I don't know, but...
I think something really crazy, like as you were talking, something else I thought about is, and this may not be directly related to the third step, but I think it's important. Like through my recovery journey, oftentimes, so we spent so much time, so I got married, right? And then the first like couple years of my life, or our marriage, was a disaster. Like I was drinking, I was using, and then I went to treatment, I got sober, and how easy it is for my mindset to be like, let's just pick up where we left off, like not acknowledging like I'm a changed man, like a changed person. I've dealt with some things, and also my wife has been like dealing with things and not pretending like that didn't happen, that journey didn't happen.
Yeah,
you know,
because that could be so, it's not helpful. Like, right. You have to empathize with and like gain the perspective of the other person.
Yeah. And also, I just thinking...
And that's cool. Yeah, sorry. I have ADHD, so my mind is like... So I'll try to help stay on track of like the third step, actually.
Well, but I do think like in relation to the third step, like it is super important to acknowledge the fact that step 2 is like you come to realize that there's a power greater than ourselves, but how often we see people in our culture, like they believe in a God or they understand that there's a God, but they don't decide to turn their life over. You can stop at step 2. You can do step 1 and realize your life has become unmanageable, and then you can come to realize there's a power greater than yourself, and then you can say, but screw you, God. Like, you allowed me to end up here, or however I ended up in this situation, and choose not to turn your life over to the care of God. And, you know, you can stop at step 2. Do I advise that? Obviously not, but there is a large distinction between saying coming to realize but also turning your life and the care over. I don't know where we're at time wise. I think that this be a decent time. We can go to a quick break and then we can just pick up where we left off.
All right,
cool.
That sounds good. All right, we'll see you back in just a bit. All right. We're going again.
Okay, so we left off talking a little bit about how you can come to realize that there's a power greater than yourself, but not make the decision to turn your will and life over to the care of God. The second part of this step is of God as we understand him.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I use the Life Recovery Bible. It's kind of where I kind of find a lot of my references or like think of some of the content that we talk about for the show. But they have the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the 12 steps of life recovery. And it's really interesting because there's a very specific distinction they leave. Like in the Life Recovery Bible, like the 12 steps of life recovery, they leave out the care of God as we understand him. But that is a distinction in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. And I think it's really fascinating how uncomfortable that concept makes Christians. I think that they immediately believe that they're like blaspheming by saying like, oh, God as we understand him, like, does that mean that I get to make God into whatever I want to make him? And is it like, do people do that? Yes. I mean, we see that every day. It's called an idol.
Yeah.
We make God whoever we want God to be. But I think that I actually really like this distinction.
Me too.
For one reason, I think because to acknowledge that we turn our lives over to the care of God as we understand him is to acknowledge that we don't understand him. Like, if
like
there's
fully or something.
Yeah, like if there's an infinite God,
Yeah.
then if we understood an infinite God at an infinite level, then like we are God.
Sure.
We don't need him.
Yeah.
So obviously we only understand him to the point that he's chosen to reveal himself to us.
Absolutely.
But I'd just be curious, like as a ministry leader, when you hear that, how does that rub you? Or like what are kind of like your gut reaction when you hear that?
Yeah, I think I think it reveals, I think people's responses to it reveal where they are in their journey with understanding who God is. I think it's a very true statement because the truth is, like, we all have an understanding of who God is.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually might be one of the reasons that you don't go to the third step, because your understanding of God was formed by an angry parent or guardian growing up. And so, because that's often how, or any authority figure, whether that was really important to you, whether a coach, a sports coach, or a music coach, or like those form ideas of higher powers. Authority does, and so if we've had terrible, just really tragic experiences growing up or traumatic experiences, maybe our understanding of God is that he's this wrathful, someone just waiting to like smack us when we do something wrong.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I wouldn't want to turn my life over to that guy either.
Right.
But and so I think it's
to the care
of him, because I've experienced that care and it's crap.
Right.
Right. So I think it's very true because it acknowledges we all have an understanding of who God is.
Yeah.
And it also, I think, is a challenge because like it makes you realize that your understanding of God might not be right. It might not be who God truly reveals himself to be in Scripture.
Yeah.
And that's uncomfortable. But it can also really lead to a lot of beauty. Like I just in my own life recently, I've been taking these seminary classes, and you often hear like the God of the Old Testament is really angry and wrathful, and Jesus, and who is God in the New Testament, he's really peaceful and loving. And like we're started working through the stories of God in the Old Testament, and what you see is he is one of the most patient, loving, gracious, generous, like unbelievable. And so much of the rhetoric that you hear is really not from the stories that God actually tells.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So I think too that like we were talking a little bit about this before, the idea that we're all on a spiritual journey. And if like in my life, I think God has seen fit to show and helped me understand a lot about him in regards to just like his grace and the outpouring of like his forgiveness and what Christ has done. But like but I don't know, but like someone else at my stage, maybe God's like really poured out and allowed them to see a lot of his holiness or like other attributes of him. And so it's unhelpful for me to come to you then and be like, you should be here where I am.
Right.
Why don't you understand grace like I do?
Yeah.
Or them to come to me and be like, why don't you understand God's holiness like I do? And realizing like, maybe because God's not going to show that to me until 20 years down the road. I don't, you know?
I think some like really obvious examples in scripture too are like just how we understand God is thinking about some of like the Old Testament heroes, right? Their understanding and perspective of God is so different than ours. So like when God chose to reveal himself to Moses, it was in a burning bush. Like Moses' understanding of God in that moment is a way that I probably won't ever understand God, at least on this side of heaven. And like Abraham, like God spoke to Abraham directly or like spoke to Moses directly. Other people in scriptures, like God sent angels. Like when God chose to speak to Joseph, to tell Joseph that like Mary's pregnant and like it is of me, like he sent an angel, or that's the way God chose to communicate to Mary, and their understanding of who God was in that moment was completely different. And then the way that God was providing to Israel was through food from the sky and a pillar of fire. The way that God chooses to communicate to us is often through scripture and community. Another like big example, I think, with Jesus specifically, talking about
like the ultimate revelation of who God is. And I'm
like,
going to show. What if God was like a person and we could see how he'd be as a person? Oh, Jesus. Oh.
And now all of a sudden we get to understand God completely different because we got to see him in the flesh and we get to have the accounts of what that was like. And when you look at the way that Jesus revealed himself to people, right? So as addicts, when we first see, I think we have to understand that as we progress in our recovery, God will reveal himself to us differently. When we first are coming to the point where we believe that we're powerless, our lives have become unmanageable, and that we believe that there's a higher power, Jesus says, I love you. You belong here. You belong with me. Nothing you've done is enough to not make me want to be around you. In fact, I won't just allow you to be around me. I want to be around you. I want to come towards you. That like
I'll go and find you.
Right. And then as the way that we progress and move forward in our recovery, he starts to say, okay, now I need to refine you. There's some things we need to look through. And I think about that in the way that Jesus actually modeled that in his actions. When a woman needed healing and she came and touched his robe and he said like, who touched me? You know? And he said, like, because of your faith, like, you're healed. Because nothing else mattered. Literally nothing she'd done in her past, not who she was in her past, the sin in her life, who she's becoming, none of that mattered. All that mattered is, like, you believed in me. And I'll heal you.
You understood me as someone who could heal you. And I can. And
I will. And when you look at the way that, like, children approach Jesus and people were trying to like herd the kids away, and God said like, no, like
let the little children come to me.
Let them come to me. I want them to be around me. And their capability of understanding God at that moment is obviously way different than his disciples. His disciples were grown men. They could understand things at a more advanced level. But when his disciples would make mistakes or look away from him, he would rebuke them. Like when Peter, I think it was Peter, like basically said like, God, I'll never like you can't go to the cross, you can't die, I won't allow that to happen. And Jesus said like, get behind me, Satan. So like depending on where we're at in our recovery journey, just like the way that Jesus communicates to children or to people who just approach him versus like his actual disciples that lived with him, he chooses to treat those people differently. He reveals different sides of his character to those people. And it's all derived from love, but
I think you exactly hit on like it's not like God is changing. Like that's one of the attributes. Like God is immutable. He does not change. Like he is love. He is light. But we change. Our circumstances are constantly changing. And if you think about your love for a friend that you have or someone like that, like in a time when they're sad, you're going to come around them and you're going to mourn with them. And you're going to be sad with them. You aren't going to be like, hey, buddy, great to see you. Oh, I'm sorry your mom passed away.
Right.
But, let's go do something fun. Like, it's not like your love is consistent for them. And because of their situation, it changes. But, like, if your buddy's about to do something really stupid, like I once was thinking about jumping off a waterfall with a bunch of friends. Like, they were like, David, no, don't do it. Don't. And they were like, let me go down and make sure how shallow it was. And it was super shallow, so I would have broken my legs. And that was but it's like, they weren't, like, mourning at that point. They weren't, like, being supportive, like, yeah, man, do whatever you want. Like, jump. They were saying, like, because of their love for me, don't do something stupid.
Right.
Yeah, and I think sometimes a lot of you guys might have had people who didn't know how to display that very well, or out of their own fear, or like I think parents will do this a lot, like because they love their kids so much, but they end up serving their own fear because they don't want their child to become a certain way in the future, and so in a moment they'll come down harsh on them because they're like, I don't want you to come there, but like what the child actually needs in that moment is like an understanding, be like, oh, well, why'd you do that?
Yeah.
Like, or like, oh, you discovered fire. Like, good job. Like, that's amazing. Rather than being really harsh with them.
Right. So I guess I would ask the question, if you have that kind of baggage, or if we all we've all been burned in different ways by like authority figures, or our parents or grandparents or guardians or bosses or whatever, pastors. How do you unpack that baggage? Like, how do you move from saying like, well, my understanding of God is wrathful, vengeful, or my understanding of authority is people like to take advantage of me or harm me, and moving towards like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think, Josh and I, we're both Christians, and for us, we have our holy book, we have the Bible, which we believe is the very word of God, and that it's true and inspired by him. And so, that's where a place where we start at first and foremost. That holds the highest authority, because that authority comes from God if he inspired and wrote it through men and different cultures and personalities. And like, so I think that's like the first place for us as Christians, is we go and we say, okay, let's go back to the raw data that we have, the stories about God, these letters that are written, and go investigate for yourself who is Jesus actually like. I think that's the first place. And then as you begin to gather that data, you'll start to make connections. And as you begin to like see like, like God didn't want to destroy this town if there was even one righteous person in it.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty cool. Or like, God heard that there was a report in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which people don't understand. Like, one of the beautiful parts of that story is that God says, hey, we've heard reports that there's a lot of evil going on in this town. He's like, I'm going to come down and check it out myself. I want all my bosses to do that. If someone has like a bad report about me, I want someone to be able to say, you know what? I'm going to go talk to him myself and see for myself.
Yeah, that's
we
good.
see that's a picture of who God is. He's like, I'm not just going to make a capricious decision. I'm going to actually go and see if it is truly as bad as it is that like his angels are reporting to him.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And so then once you have that data and you start to understand how loving and gracious God is, then I think you can start to then filter experiences that you've had through that grid.
Yeah.
And say, okay, when this authority figure acted this way, if you like remove the fact that they're an authority figure and just judge their actions, that wasn't cool. Like, they were kind of being an a-hole there. Like, and then I think that's a way that you can start to reparent yourself or just, I don't know, refriend yourself, or just like work through a lot of those issues. And that takes that takes time, that takes counseling. And I don't know, what do you think? How?
I think what you're saying is really good. I think the big thing is, don't expect it to happen overnight. allow God to reveal himself to you. I think it's just really important to acknowledge, like, my intent for this show is not to bait and switch people. I want to make it really clear that, like, we believe that Jesus Christ can and will change our lives, that he equips us with the Holy Spirit, and that everything that we believe in recovery is stemming through the fact that, like, God has, like, chosen to pull me out of my mess and take me along. And we talked about it in past shows, just like, can people get sober without God? Sure, we see it. But believing in the concept of common grace, that God does love all people, we talk about that a lot. But
Jesus says it. He's like, doesn't God send, like, the water for, like, unrighteous people and righteous people? Like, he sends rains for their crops. Like,
right.
He sends the sun to shine on everyone, like, whether they're good or bad. Like, God gives common grace. God gives grace to all people.
Yeah.
Because he loves the world.
So yeah, I think the number one way to kind of, like, change and shift our perspective on authority is just giving ourselves time, allowing God to continue to reveal himself to us, and then just, like, having a proper criteria of, I talk about often in aspects that we struggle, you need to, like, create a rubric or a filter before emotions are involved. So take some time when you're in, like, sane mind and say, who are people that I actually care about,
that are, like, trustworthy.
And
have my best interest in mind. That
right. And then just
because we know the friends who will be like, oh, that's not a big deal. Come on, man, do this.
Right.
You don't have a problem.
Right.
You know.
And then being able to, like, acknowledge when people harm us or hurt us, saying, does this person even have any weight in my life? I shouldn't let this skew my view of authority when this person's authority doesn't really matter. But then continuing to filter things through who God says he is. Like I say often, if we really believe that God is who he says he is, then we have to believe that we are who we say we are.
Who he says we are?
Right.
Yeah.
And so
that's beautiful.
Just coming to the point that we really do believe that God is who he says he is.
Yeah, and that's, man, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. That's a process. And it doesn't have to, I think what you're saying too is, like, because it takes time, this isn't one major decision. These are decisions that you get to make
daily. Yeah,
and every short story of every little moment of your life of, like, and if you think about, like, if it's like, well, how do you turn it over to a God you can't see or know? I think it helps when you start thinking about, like, how, if you had a child, like, what does it look like for a child to turn their care over to you? If you have, like, a friend that is a trusted voice, what does it look like if they were to, turn their care over to you? Like, if you were responsible for their care, or vice versa, like, if turning your will and your life over to the care of someone else, like people do this. I've done this in the past with my relationships with, like, girls, or like I have trusted voices. We do this all the time, I think, with friends. We're like, hey, what do you think about this text? Should I send this? I do that to you. Like, that's a way I'm entrusting my will and life over to Josh in heaven. I'll say, like, is this an okay text? I don't want this to be weird. I want this girl to feel safe, and I often am just oblivious to social stuff and cues. So, like, that's one way I do that in my life. And then I think like, as you get to know the Lord, you'll like work through those as his word, as his Holy Spirit brings the word to mind, and you're like, what would be the best way to, like, interact in this situation? Yeah. And you asking the Lord, that's the way that you can entrust your will, how you make decisions, that act of will, that and then your life and how you're living, and how you're spending your money and your time, and how you're serving others, like, filtering through that. And it doesn't mean you get rid of your personality, or it doesn't mean you get rid of, like, how God has uniquely made you. It means that you're getting rid of what's really harmful, which is, like, selfishness and all this bitterness and all this hurt.
I really appreciate what you were saying about kind of making this decision. It's not something we make our decision one time. So I think in recovery, like, so step one, coming to the, like, realization that we're powerless. Step two, kind of, like, accepting that there is a God. Step three, making the decision to turn our wills and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. We have to make that decision every day. Yeah. Because I could wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm going to turn like my life and my will over to the care of myself today, and like what I want. We talk about taking up your cross daily, dying daily to your flesh. Kind of making that decision every day and turning your will and your life to the care of God daily, making that decision.
Well, and isn't it like we all know what happens when we turn our will and our lives over to the care of ourselves.
Yeah, that's how we ended up where we ended up.
It's like we tried to do that the best we could, and we got lost. We're in the pit.
Totally. It sounds like you've been going to AA meetings your whole life, because that's the epitome. Like, we say, like, my best thinking is what got me here.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we talk about. And
I have a pastor. The pastor of our church, he'll often say that in sermons, like, your best thinking got you. And that's true.
Yep.
So that's why, it doesn't help to turn your care and your life over to yourself.
Yeah.
Because that ain't going to help you.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah.
I haven't asked this question to anybody yet on this season. Obviously, you're my first guest, but anybody who's listened to sort of past episodes, I like to ask this question to any of my guests. I know that you're not an addict. You're not like in recovery, but when you go out to like eat or you're at home, what is your drink of choice? I know the answer to this.
I don't know if you do. You might. My drink of... Okay, how do I know? Write it down. Write down what you think I'm going to say.
Well, now that makes me think that you're not going to say what I think you're going to say. Let me clarify your non-alcoholic beverage.
Yeah, that's... I don't care too much for beer
sure.
anyways. Because I don't like that it makes me sleepy.
Sure.
It's so stupid. So my choice drink would be a Diet Coke that's with vanilla.
Okay.
Like
I would have said Diet Coke. I wouldn't have said with vanilla.
They used to have Diet Vanilla Coke, and then some Yahoo over at
Coke
got rid of it, and now they have like Diet Coke Zero, which I don't understand still the difference between them. But they don't often have that. But
remember last year where
Diet
it was
Coke,
like
the sweet nectar of life.
Remember last year that commercial like orange vanilla
Yes.
Coke? I saw a billboard driving yesterday of like new cherry vanilla Coke, and I'm just like, are they just gonna change the fruit every year?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Anyways,
what's yours?
Oh yeah. Right now is peach Red Bull.
Ooh.
Or maybe it's nectarine. I don't know. It comes in like a dark orange can, and I was just sharing
maybe it's peach/nectarine.
Probably. I was sharing with somebody the other day, like the way I feel in the morning when I'm like sitting at my desk at work and I crack one of those open and take a sip, and like the satisfaction that flows through my body,
the flood of endorphins
is just not good. But yeah, it's peach Red Bull.
Nice.
Really quickly again, if people want to find out more about Grace Lead or want to support you financially, where can they go to do that?
If you want to support me financially, you could go to I don't know the site off the top of my head, but you could send me...
Is there like a link through your website?
Yeah, and I just have redone my website, so...
Okay.
You could send an email to giving@gracelead.org.
Great.
Or david@gracelead.org, and I can send you the link.
Or let me know, and I'll get it to you.
Or just go to gracelead.org, and it's in shambles right now. You'll go to it, and it's like a template that has nothing to do with Grace Lead, so...
That's okay.
Well, I'm working on it, though. I'm almost done.
Maybe by the time... You never know when people hear this.
Yeah, that's true. So.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for coming to my studio. We'll send it. Maybe we'll post a picture of the entire mess.
I could do that. Yeah.
That would be awesome, because you can see. My room is a picture of an addict's life.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Love you very much. Next week we will be talking about step 4. Appreciate you. We'll talk soon.